I never know what their fascination is with running over this section right here. But hey, how many of you remember how much fun you used to have on family vacations when you're trapped in the car for 9 hours? Isn't that a lot of fun? You know, when you're driving somewhere, some of you are just smiling at me. The family taking summer trips, gosh, I remember as a little boy, occasionally we'd sneak off on a trip somewhere, and we'd get so bad, and of course I grew up with two other brothers, Matt and Steve, and we'd get so bad that my mother would literally just say, we had a rule, and keep in mind, gang, this was long before seatbelts were ever on the scene. Y'all do remember that, right? And y'all remember when you could climb up in the back of the back seat and sleep underneath, right, where the sun shined in through the window? Y'all, how many of you have done that? Come on, yeah. It got so bad in our car that we had a hands rule where my mom, literally, we'd be driving down the road, and me, Matt, and Steve would all have our hands on the front seats. Because if we didn't have our hands on the front seats, y'all know where our hands were at. We were all over each other. And literally, I can remember a vacation to the mountains one time where my mother pulled over and told us all to get out of the car. And we said, why are we getting out? Because she says, I'm considering leaving you. Don't you guys just love family vacation? I read several years ago about a family that took summer trips, and they decided that to avoid conflict and to keep peace, that each member of the family would get 1 hour of CD time. Now, keep in mind, younger folks, this was before the internet, before iPods and iPhones, and how, we pass along music now. But this was back when you pushed the CD in and everybody in the car got to listen to whatever was on the CD. So they made a rule. They said, everybody in the car is going to get an hour's listening time of the music of your choice, and that's just the way it's going to be. And so the first hour, Mom, who liked gospel, got gospel music. And the second hour, the daughter who liked dance music got dance music. And the third hour, the son loved rock and roll. He got rock and roll. On the fourth hour, Dad got his turn. He plugged his CD in. It was completely blank. And so he got nothing. Which is a way some family trips feel when you're driving along. As a parent, you almost get nothing out of it because you're so frazzled by what's going on in the back seat. And, the interesting thing about it is in our journey through life, you and I would like for everything to run smoothly, wouldn't we? We would really like to have no negative waves, no drama, no conflict. We'd like smooth sailing all the time. We'd like for everything to be peaceful. But the problem with it is that's like living life with a blank CD, isn't it? You don't get anything out of life. But some of you are saying, you're going, yeah, but for just 1 hour, everything could be cool. Yeah, maybe. See, what's interesting is conflict is actually part of our existence. If you're here today and you're human, let me say that again. If you're here today and you're human, sometimes, conflict is part of being human. I remember years ago, Serendipity House, the Christian publishers, published a series of lessons on the idea that conflict resolution. And they talked about the fact that in an introduction that the entire Bible is actually a book of conflicts. And when I started thinking about their introduction, I thought, yeah, they've hit it. They're spot on. Because the reality of it is the Bible tells the story of our conflict with God, right? Because of sin. In fact, the Bible's really clear. We're in such conflict with God that sin has separated us from God. And then the Apostle Paul comes along in Romans chapter 5, verse 1, and he says, since we've been made right with God by our faith, we have peace with God. And finally, we get peace with God through Jesus Christ. And so Jesus' death brings us peace with God. But if you think about it, not only do we have conflicts with God, we've also got conflicts with each other. Because have you guys ever noticed that the Bible is full of stories of people who are mad at each other? Have you guys ever thought about this? I mean, there are conflicts all the way through the Bible about people and their relationship. And of course, here's the truth. If there's ever a relationship, there's at some point or another, there's going to be a conflict. How many of you know what the shortest book in the Bible is? Think before you answer. I'll give you a choice. You got a choice between Philemon and Jude. Which would you pick? Philemon. Yeah, you didn't get the emphasis there, yeah. Philemon, shortest book in the Bible, and I mean that shortest. By the way, Philemon and Jude both have 25 verses in them, but Philemon has less words. But here's the point. Here's the point. How many of you know what the book of Philemon is about? It's actually about a conflict between a master and a slave, isn't it? And who's the mediator? Who's the peacemaker? Paul. I mean, the Bible devotes a whole book to it, practically. And I want you to understand something. As long as there is sin in the world, there's going to be conflicts in relationships. Now, the reason I'm going to talk about this is I want to follow up from last week's sermon, because last week's sermon was the idea that you can either offend someone and hurt someone, or you can be offended and hurt by someone. So what do we do to try to make sure that those kinds of things don't happen? And what do we do to try to preserve unity and peace? I want to show you, we're going to start from James, first of all, James chapter 4. I want to do that verse first, James chapter 4. Well, there's Matthew 5. I like that verse. We're going to come back to that verse. Let's look at that verse. Well, let's go to James 4. Hey, by the way, when you guys look at this on YouTube this week, you can just laugh. James, well, there you go. I quit. All right, I'm done. Blessed, yeah, right. How many of you guys have ever heard Matthew 5:9? One of the Beatitudes, right? A mediator over here has definitely heard it, yeah. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the sons of God. Blessed are the peacemakers. That's our starting off point. That's our kicking off point. But to get to that point of being peacemakers, we need to look at this James 4 verse. We're going to come back to Matthew 5:9, I promise you. Where do you think all these appalling wars and quarrels come from? Do you think they just happen? Think again. They come about because you want your own way and fight for it deep inside yourselves. You lust for what you don't have and are willing to kill to get it. You want what isn't yours and will risk violence to get your hands on it. You wouldn't think of just asking God for it, would you? And why not? Because you know you'd be asking for what you have no right to. You're spoiled children. Each of you wanting your own way. You know, oftentimes when we have relationships and we have conflict and we have difficulties in our relationship, bottom line is because we just want our way. Right? You ever seen people that just, I feel like at this point I want to have Michael come up and share some stories from his business, but for those of you, he's a mediator. And the interesting thing is you've met people that literally just dig their heels in and are immovable. And they're not going to be moved. Why? They want their own way. And James says that kind of attitude is a spoiled attitude. It's like being a little kid. Let me put it to you in a word you understand. You're a brat. You understand? And what's interesting, a lot of times in our relationships, as long as there's sin and as long as we have that attitude of just being spoiled and wanting our own way and digging our feet in and not being able to bend and never breaking and never giving and never taking, there's going to be conflict in relationships, even with the people that we love. And so what's interesting is peacemakers are in big demand right now. peacemakers, there's always going to be a need for them. Not only in our relationships with each other, but how many of you think we need a few peacemakers in the world today? Yeah, we could have used a few yesterday in Charlottesville, couldn't we? Yeah, it was chaotic. Peacemakers are in big demand. I remember years ago when I was in a session of yearly meeting in Black Mountain, and haven't talked about him in a long while. Let's talk about him for a moment. How about good old John Porter, everybody? How many of you love John Porter? John Porter for years was superintendent of North Carolina yearly meeting, and personally a very good friend to this congregation, and a good man to this day. Just recently spoke with him, and he's doing really well, and just an absolute, just a very solid good man. Years ago, John was speaking at a session in yearly meeting, and it was when yearly meeting was really in a turmoil. And he spoke that night on a very simple subject. His subject was this: there are 3 types of people in the world when it comes to peace. And these are the 3 types of people that he talked about that night. I'll give them to you, and then we'll move on further with Scripture. John says there's 3 types of people in the world when it comes to peace. Number 1 are the peace breakers. The peace breakers. Those are the people who really like a good fight, who enjoy conflict. They like it. They like confrontation. They are deliberately confrontational sometimes. Those are the people that are overly aggressive. Those are the people that often speak before they think. Those are the people that are often very poor listeners. Those are people who like to be right, who like to be first, who like to finish on top, and who like to win every argument. They're peace breakers. You guys know anybody like that? I know a couple people that way. You know what their motto is? Benjamin Disraeli said it best. Here's the motto of the peace breakers: the most agreeable person in the world is the person who agrees with me. I always think about what T.D. Jakes says. You want to be right, you want to be reconciled. These people choose to always be right and forget about being reconciled. Guys, listen, there are people that are peace breakers. Then there are the people that John called the peace fakers. The peace fakers are the individuals who prefer peace over truth. Here's what they do. They like to sweep truth underneath the rug and then look at everybody and go, isn't it great that we're living in peace? Right? They'll ignore conflict, avoid conflict, run away from conflict, and they have a really simple philosophy. If we don't talk about it, it won't be a problem. How many of you grew up like that sometimes in your relationships with people? You know, if we don't talk about it, it's not a problem. Or maybe the philosophy goes something like this: I'll just go along to get along. Just think what you will and do what you want to do, and we'll just all be together. But listen, those are peace fakers, because that's not real peace. And then finally, John said, of course, that evening, then there are the peacemakers. The breakers, the fakers, and the makers. How catchy is that, y'all? It's a good sermon. And I still remember it to this day. There are the peacemakers. And listen, I want to tell you something. Anybody that's a peacemaker in your home, in your work, in the world that you live in, it requires 2 things: divine power and divine strength. And you don't have either one, but you need them. And so you have to look to God. There's a great need for peacemaking in the church and in the world. Proverbs tells us this, Proverbs 12:20. I want you to see it. Proverbs 12:20. There is deceit in the heart of those who plot evil, but joy for those who promote peace. How about Romans 14:19? Just a reminder to everybody in the church. Let us therefore make every effort to do what leads to peace and to mutual edification. Hey, this business is a two-way street, isn't it, gang? Y'all, come on. Mutual edification and peace. Make every effort to do it. And by the way, we acknowledge that sometimes we make every effort and somebody else chooses not to. And so it's a little hard. Now, I promised you we'd go back to Matthew chapter 5, verse 9, and I really think we're going to get right on it now. Matthew 5, verse 9. I want you to see this verse. Here is the golden text for peacemaking. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the sons of God. Now, let's understand something really quick about the Beatitudes, because listen, these are part of the Beatitudes, right, from Matthew. And let's understand something about them. Edward Farrell said this, and he's spot on right. The Beatitudes teach us what Jesus looks like. Okay? They teach us what Jesus looks like. They're the foundations on which you build your faith. They are the 8 qualities of people that call themselves Christians. You don't get to pick and choose which one of the Beatitudes you like. Right? It's kind of like the 10 Commandments aren't the 10 suggestions, right? Well, the Beatitudes are the same way. Either follow all of them or follow none of them. But settle down on them. They are Christ's measure of what every Christian should be. They're the qualities that characterize people that follow Jesus. And one of the qualities, he says, is that we as Christians are peacemakers. Not breakers or fakers, but makers. Okay? We're peacemakers. Just out of curiosity, really quick, does anybody in here today, you don't have to answer this, but I want you to answer it to yourself. Does anybody here need to make peace with somebody or some situation? See, sometimes we have to make peace with the situation, don't we? Other times it's a person. One of the characteristics of us as believers is by our very nature, we wade into conflict trying to make peace. Trying to make peace. It's a thankless job. It's not very attractive. In fact, there's a lot of secular people that will tell you that if you're a peacemaker, you're weak. But I want to tell you that if you're a peacemaker, you're really strong. And you've got a lot of character, and you've got some depth, and you're willing to fight for it. I'll tell you this, if you go and make peace in a situation, it won't make front page news tomorrow, because this is not the kind of stuff people like to talk about. Now, one thing else I've learned about peacemaking, that is this. When you're trying to break up two sides and you wade into the middle of it, you know what happens sometimes? You get hit from both directions. Why? Because you're doing something you're doing something supernatural that other people don't like. Because Howard Thurman was right, y'all. Come on. Nobody wins a fight. And Churchill said there's nothing I like better than a fight. But nobody wins a fight. Have you guys ever thought about that? You don't win fights. Because any fight that we have diminishes us, doesn't it? And there's many of you that have been in relationships where you somebody, and after a while, they shut down and they get real quiet, and that means two things. One, you've won the fight, and two, now you're hurting them. Right? Y'all are sitting and looking at me like dull-faced, like y'all have never been a human involved in this kind of stuff. Do you understand what I'm saying? See, what's interesting is one of the characteristics of the church people is church people aren't supposed to like fights. And we're supposed to be making peace to the best of our ability. Understanding that, our side of the argument is we're open to it. We're trying to make peace. Well, look at what he says, and let's just tear it apart real quick. Blessed. See the word blessed? Y'all know the word means happy, right? Yeah. It means happy. It means something a little deeper than that, too. It means something like this. Having the satisfaction of knowing that God really favors you. Would you be happy in an argument if you realized that God was satisfied with what you were trying to do in order to make something better? Would that make you happy? It would make me happy. If I just knew that God's favor was on me because I was trying to be a peacemaker. Blessed, happy, satisfied is God. God is absolutely, His favor is upon you. Why? Because you're a peacemaker. Now, I want to remind you again, the blessing comes to the peacemaker and not the peace lover. Everybody loves peace, right? But the blessing is on the person who does what? Who faces things and tries to make peace. That's who God looks on with favor, is the person who's out there going, gosh, I'm tired of this. I want to try to iron this thing out. I want to be a peacemaker about this. And that's where God's favor rests, on that person. And then he goes on to say this, and by the way, our English just struggles trying to translate this. For they will be called the children of God. Our English is just like, at this point, is almost paralyzed trying to translate this word. Because you know what the word literally means? It means something to the effect of this. The people that are busy making peace are the people that are doing God-like work. They're acting like sons of God or daughters of God. And you say, well, what do you mean by that? Has anybody ever noticed the number of times in the New Testament that the Apostle Paul calls God the God of peace? Anybody ever notice that? I can show you in at least 5 places if we had time, where he talks about the God of peace. And what he's saying is, he's saying, blessed are the peacemakers. Why? Because they're doing a God-like business. They are working in a godly fashion, and all they're doing is being like their Father, who by His very nature is peaceful. Right? How many of you want to be like Jesus? Well, yeah. Okay, well, according to this beatitude, he said, if you want to be God-like, you want to be like Christ, be peaceful. Make peace. Make peace. We're just doing God-like work. And so really, well, I can paraphrase the verse for you. Blessed are those who produce right relationships between people, for they're doing a God-like work. And that's what Jesus is saying. Now, I've told you once, I'll tell you again. You have to recognize your limitations, because you can work peace, promote peace, extend peace to someone. But if someone chooses not to accept your peace, you understand, right? That's the reason why the Apostle Paul said, you just make every effort. You just make every effort. Sometimes in my life, I walk away from situations and I think to myself, well, it didn't work out like I wanted it to work out, but at least I know I did the right thing. Y'all, you can go to bed and sleep at night when you know you've done the right thing, right? When your conscience is clear and you've tried the best you know how to make peace, then you go to bed going, okay, I've done what I can do. Robert Barclay put it best. The man who divides men is doing the devil's work, but the man who unites men is doing God's work. See, I want to be doing God's work. I want to be bringing people together rather than pulling them apart. Here's something else I thought about, and I'm going to finish with a verse and I'm done, but there's a blessing on peacemakers, isn't there? Y'all, there's a blessing on peacemakers. Let me just add to that, woe if you're a peace breaker. If you're a peace breaker, you better watch out. God doesn't take kindly to that, because one of the characteristics of His church is He wants the church to be peacemakers, and as we started worship today, He wants the church to be in unity, doesn't He? Because that's a place of blessing. So be careful if you're the peace breaker. I want to finish with old camel knees, James, the man of prayer that he was. I want you to see James's words, James chapter 3, 16 through 18. Whenever you're trying to look better than others or get the better of others, things fall apart and everyone ends up at others' throats. Real wisdom, God's wisdom, begins with a holy life and is characterized by getting along with others. It is gentle. This life is reasonable. It's overflowing with mercy and blessings. Not hot one day and cold the next. Two-faced. You can develop a healthy, robust community that lives right with God and enjoys its results only if you do the hard work of getting along with each other, treating each other with dignity and honor. What y'all think? Well, I tell you what I think. I think James nailed it. The hard work of getting along with others. Because it is hard sometimes, isn't it? And it is difficult. And there's sometimes in our lives, as we said last week, that there's people who have hurt us. There's people that have offended us. And it is so hard to get along with them. But what we want to do is we want to develop a healthy, robust community here where we keep doing the hard work of getting along. Amen? Now you think there's any need in the world or in your home or in your work for peacemakers? What do you think? Yeah. I'm just so grateful for John speaking that message that night because it has always resonated with me, and I hope it will with you as well. We're going to move.